Good evening. I'm Pastor Jason, pastor here at United Protestant Church, and first of all, I want to welcome everyone for being here, and I want to thank you all for being here. This is an incredibly hard but important topic and conversation to have. I was just saying to Chris, I know this sounds a little odd to say given the topic, but I'm psyched that we're here and that we're going to hear this. So I'm grateful to our mission team and particularly to Cinda, wherever. If mission team, would you raise your hands? Everyone, there, Cinda's up there. So everyone who contributed to make this evening possible, just wanted to say thank you and recognize you. And I want to say a quick prayer, and then I know you're not here for me, so I will get out of your way, but let us pray. The Lord be with you. Holy God, we give you thanks that your Spirit has gathered us here. We give you thanks for Chris Baker, for Inc. 180, for their incredible work, living and acting with human beings who we know are children of God, and acting to make sure that those who have been treated otherwise or been made by the world to see themselves otherwise, to be pulled out of that and be given a chance by your grace to turn forward, to know themselves as children of God, and to walk in the light with you. We pray for Inc. 180 and for Chris and all the work they do. And we pray for all who gather here, that by your grace and your Spirit, you might inspire each of us to partner with Chris in his work, as well as to live our lives to prevent as much of this brokenness as we humanly can, and to praise you and worship you for the gift of life that you give to each of us. We pray all of this, trusting in your grace and your mercy and your steadfast love. Amen. Well, I want to get out of the way because Chris will say everything better, so please would you give a warm welcome to Chris Baker.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Good evening. How are you guys? All right. Before I get into things, I just want to say, you're going to hear things tonight that hurt. You're going to hear things tonight that are going to make it a little difficult to sleep. And you're going to hear things tonight that are going to make you want to figure out what God's plan is for you in all of this mess. Give you a little bit of intro before I get into the slides. I'm a 51-year-old tattoo artist and minister. I believe I have the coolest job in America. I really do, because it's from God. I grew up in an Irish Catholic home. My mom grew up in Northern Ireland and came to the United States when she was 9. And she raised me and my sister on her own. She was 5'2" of Irish fury, but she loves Jesus. But I ran away from God my whole life. I didn't become a Christian until I was 38. In the depth of my brokenness, I was at the deepest, darkest place of my life. I was suicidal. My wife, Lisa, came to me one day and she said, I'm worried about you, Chris. I think that we should go and talk to somebody together and get some help. And I was so broken and so lost that I looked at my beautiful wife and I said, yes, we should go to see a counselor, because they can tell you all the things you're doing wrong as my wife to make me be this way. And I don't say that with any pride in my voice or heart. That's just how broken I was. My wife found a counselor named Joan Guest. God rest her soul. We lost her about 5 years ago. But Joan was amazing. Lisa and I went in to meet with Joan on a Saturday morning in January. And I walked in with shorts on and short sleeves because I knew she was a Christian and I knew she was going to hate my tattoos, and I didn't care. But we went into her office, and I've said this here before when I've spoken before, but it's the only way I can really describe Joan and do her justice. Do any of you remember the church lady from Saturday Night Live? That was Joan. God bless her. She was in her 60s, very tight perm, long dress to the floor. You couldn't even see her shoes. And she walked us back down the hallway to her office and opened the door. And we walk in, and I am not even kidding. She had all those horrible, like, 70s and 80s cat posters, the encouragement ones, hanging there, all that stuff. But we sat down and we talked to Joan for that hour, and it was like sitting with your favorite aunt that you haven't talked to in years. And it was just a peace in this room. And I didn't, at the time, I didn't know what it was. And at the end of the session, we both really liked her, and we made an appointment for the following week to come in and really start working on things. And she said, as I grabbed my hoodie to get ready to go out, she said, "Chris, hang on. I always like to offer to pray for my clients before we wrap up." And I rolled my eyes. I was like, "Joan, if you think that's going to do me any good, go right ahead." And she did. And we bowed our heads and we closed our eyes, because this is how my grandma used to always tell me, if you don't close your eyes when somebody prays, Jesus doesn't listen. So I'm sitting there in the chair like this, next to my wife, and Joan's about 10 feet across the room, and she starts to pray. And it was a prayer like none other that I'd ever heard. It was about us being open to new ways of communicating and discussing and listening and change of heart, just all this amazing stuff. And I'm sitting there with my eyes closed, and I had a physical feeling take over, and the only way I can describe that is like when you take a fleece blanket out of the dryer on a really cold day, and it's warm and it's soft and it feels good. And it felt like somebody draped that over my shoulders as I'm sitting there listening to this counselor pray for me and my wife. And then I didn't hear a voice, but I had a thought come into my brain and keep coming over and over again. It was, just follow me and this will be okay. Stop running. Stop running. And I broke down, sobbing. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew exactly what was happening. I had an encounter with the Holy Spirit in that counselor's office. I went to church the next morning. 6 months later, I was on top of a mountain in Haiti helping my church build a school. And the transformation process that Jesus started in that counselor's office continues every day of my life. Because through a lot of counseling and Jesus and prayer and discussions with my wife, I've discovered a very painful truth, and that's that I'm not perfect. But I also learned that I don't have to be. So when Jesus started transforming me, I was doing any kind of outreach work I could do because I thought I had to earn my way back into heaven, right? And I was doing homeless outreach. I was like, we had a group of the youth group kids that would go out and cut the grass for the elderly folks in the neighborhood and, picking up trash on the side of the highway. Whatever it was, I was in. I'm like, yep, I'm your guy. I'll be there. But then I started praying and asking Jesus, like, what's my purpose? Because you see, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles in the 80s. All my friends were in gangs. I wasn't, but they all were. I was their artist. I've been tattooing for a long time. Been a professional tattoo artist for 29 years. But I started tattooing when I was 15 on my mom's front porch in Carson, California with her sewing kit. And that's how I stayed alive in South Central Los Angeles. I have 17 friends who are deceased because of that. A lot of people ask me, Chris, why would you leave California and come to Chicagoland? 17 years ago, a really good friend of mine, one of my best friends, his name was Dante. He was a member of the Bloods, street gang, Pirate Bloods, Centerview Avenue. And he went to jail for some crimes he pled guilty to. And he was in jail for 2.5 years. But I went to visit him once a month, and he would kind of tell me what was going on. And he said that he started going to church in jail because they would get extra rec time if they went to church. But then he was telling me more and more as time went on how he was really diving into it. And then he got baptized in jail, in church, in jail. And then he got out. And we had a party like we would always do for one of the guys who came home. I'll never forget, we were there all day. It's a beautiful, sunny Southern California day. Dante spent the whole time trying to tell a bunch of knucklehead guys about Jesus. We didn't want to hear it. We had a good time hanging out and catching up. And about 7:30, everybody's kind of wives and girlfriends went home, and the guys hung out. About 11 o'clock, we were trying to wrap things up, and a group of about 15 of us walked out to the front. And one by one, guys would leave, and about 11:45, there was 7 of us left hanging out. And all the streetlights on Centerview Avenue had been shot out by the drug dealers and the gangs because they didn't want people being able to see what they were doing. So it was real dark. And at 11:47 p.m., a silver Chevy Tahoe came creeping down that street with its headlights cut out. The passenger side window was rolled down, and a 12-gauge shotgun stuck out that window. They called out Dante's street name, and they shot him in the chest with a buckshot from a 12-gauge shotgun. I was 3 feet to his left. My buddy Tony was about 4 to 5 feet to his right. And when we heard that blast go, we dove towards him because we knew they were targeting him because they called him out. We just wanted to cushion his fall. And I reached back. I got my hand around his back, and he was gone. There was no reviving Dante. My friend bled to death in mine and Tony's arms that night. The night that he told us how great Jesus was. I moved my family to Chicagoland after that. My wife's from Chicago. We met in high school in LA, got married after that. But we wanted our kids to grow up around family. And my wife's got a big Italian family. And so we moved out here. We live in Oswego. And every night, we'd watch the news before bed. And in between the sports and the weather, they would talk about how many kids got shot on the south side and the west side. Before I had faith in my life, I used to be one of those people who would be like, man, they got to do something about this. These politicians aren't doing anything. They don't care what's going on in the hood. Cops don't care about what's going on in the hood. Somebody's got to do something. And then I met Jesus, and he started telling me, well, you're someone. And I said, yeah. And that's when I got this calling. And I'll tell you, this calling has been incredibly interesting. There's been beautiful parts of it, and there's been tragic parts of it, and everything in between. In 2011, he told me, go do what you love to do more than anything. Use the gifts I gave you and help people that are trying to change their lives like Dante. So we started Inc. 180 to be able to remove or cover tattoos for people for free that were leaving gang life. I gave an update at my church about 6 months into it. People were really intrigued by it, really interested, because it's different. And when I gave that update at church, I had a guy come running after me as I was walking to my car after church. And his name is Agent Brian Smith. He was a narcotics agent with Homeland Security. And I'd met him once or twice at church, but I didn't really know him. And he said, hey, Chris, I think you should come and talk to our gang unit. They'd love to work with you. I said, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I wasn't working with any feds at that time. It was just local law enforcement guys and state law enforcement. I was like, that sounds pretty interesting, because growing up, I got questioned by cops all the time. And to be working with federal agents and not be handcuffed to a table answering their questions was pretty intriguing to me. So he set up the meeting for 2 weeks later. I was driving up to the meeting in Chicago, and he called me on my cell phone, and I broke the law and answered it while I was driving, sorry. But he said, hey, Chris, do you mind if our trafficking team sits in on this? They want to hear what you're doing. Trafficking? I was like, drug trafficking? What does that have to do with tattoos? He said, no, it's sex trafficking. I was like, I had heard things about sex trafficking, but it was like an over there problem. Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe. And I said, yeah, I don't know anything about it. I would love to talk to them, see if there's a way I can help. And he said, okay, so I get up there, I do the gang presentation, like 20 minutes, signed, sealed, delivered, we're good. I was working with feds. And I look at the commander for this trafficking team, I said, can you give me an idea of what this trafficking is all about? And he spent 2.5 hours with me. If we can go to the next slide. I'll walk you through these. I don't expect you to read the eye chart. Although I printed it out real small, so it's going to be a bit of an eye chart for my old eyes too. But so they started breaking it down for me. I said, what is sex trafficking in the United States? They started telling me statistics, and I'll share some of these with you. There's an estimated number of 250 to 300,000 American kids being forcibly sold in the sex trade in this country every day. The average age that they get pulled into it or groomed into it is 13. I'll tell you, I've had survivors as young as 12. And I'll tell you about that here in a few. There's a lot of things out there, you know, people always bring up, oh, it's like the movie Taken. No, throw that away, that's Hollywood. I'll tell you, I've only had one survivor in 10 years of doing this work that was kidnapped. The rest were all either, they ran away from home, they were lured away, groomed via social media, they were on the streets, they were addicted to drugs, and they got pulled into it. I've only had one who was actually kidnapped. Another thing that a lot of people bring up because of our situation at the border, oh, all those people that are flooding in from other countries are being trafficked. I'm sure that happens, but I'll tell you that every single survivor I've helped in the last 10 years have been American citizens. And they look like my kids, and your kids, and your grandkids, and your neighbors' kids. And it's heartbreaking. These victims have a daily quota that their pimps and traffickers require them to bring in, a money quota. I've heard everything from $1,000 to $10,000 a day. If they don't meet that quota at the end of the day, they face violence. I had a young woman. I was covering a tattoo of her pimp's name on the back of her neck. It was in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm covering this tattoo, trying to make small talk, trying to not trigger her PTSD, which they almost always have. And I noticed she had a surgical scar at the base of her neck area, about 3 inches wide. And she said, is that scar going to be an issue? I said, nope, not at all. She's like, do you want to know the story behind it? I said, you tell me what you're comfortable telling me. You don't owe me any explanations whatsoever. And she said, well, one night I came home, the first night that I came back and didn't make my quota, my pimp took a pool cue and broke it over my neck. And I had to have spinal fusion surgery. 23-year-old girl. This is happening right here. People, when they learn about, oh, it's happening in the United States, they're like, okay, well, maybe on the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, where all the bad stuff happens, right? But I'm telling you, I'm going to show you some examples of this happening right here. We just had a case that was prosecuted. I live near Naperville, and people that live in Naperville think nothing bad ever happens in Naperville. Everything's sunny in Naperville, very affluent area. They drive Ferraris and Porsches and Bentleys, and us scumbags from Oswego coming to mess it up. I spoke at a church, and I had a woman come up to me afterwards. I always like to stay and answer questions and meet people. This woman came up to me wearing like a $3,000 fur coat and holding Mercedes keys in her hands. She's like, Chris, thank you for coming and for what you do, but that doesn't really happen in Naperville, does it? Well, we had a case where two brothers bought a foreclosed home 2 blocks from downtown Naperville and operated a brothel for 2 years with 16 girls. Nobody knew it. The way they operated it, they knew what they were doing. This happens everywhere. Inner city, city, suburbs, rural, you name it, we've seen that. People ask me, or people say, I travel all over the country and do these talks. And when I do, people say, yeah, we're the #1 city for human trafficking. I'm like, first of all, it's nothing to be proud of if it was true. Second of all, I don't really score cities. Are there places that are worse? Yeah, of course. There's always going to be a worst place. But if it's one, it's too many. One of the things that we're fighting right now very, very briskly, one of my top priorities for the ministry, besides covering these tattoos or removing them, the people who are out there buying, the Johns who are out there paying for sex with kids or adults, doesn't matter to me. Right now, it's a misdemeanor. It's like a speeding ticket. I want it to be a Class X felony. And I want them to have to register as sex offenders for 20 years. And I want the money that they have to pay to register as a sex offender to go towards educational programs for our kids. I'm 51 years old. We didn't have social media, cell phones, Twitter, TikTok, all the garbage that we have now. We didn't have any of that, and I thank God for it every day. I can't imagine how difficult it is to be a young person right now. I tell people all the time, I love this invention, but I hate it at the same time. One of the things that we see as a huge issue with trafficking on the demand side is pornography addiction. Pornography changes the chemicals in a person's brain, and it makes you think that things are normal that aren't normal. And we've had Johns caught up in John stings at the Super Bowl that have said to us, well, my wife didn't want to do this, so I just figured I'll just pay somebody, and it's a harmless crime because they're getting paid, right? These victims don't keep any money. Not that that even should matter. Even if they got to keep it all, it shouldn't matter. It's still wrong. But that's how people justify it. I have attempted numerous times to set up men's events. Churches have amazing events for women around things like this. Why aren't we talking to our men about it? And I've proposed it. I've got guys who have specialties in different areas. I was like, guys, we'll do it for free. We just want to do this event. And elders boards will sit there and say, yeah, it's a great idea, Chris. We love this. We really need to do this. You're right. We need to talk about this as men. And then it's crickets. My church has one of the few porn recovery groups that I've ever seen in a church. And it's led by my pastor because he's very transparent in how he's had to fight that for a long time. I think that's pretty amazing that he was willing to stand up in front of the church and say, guys, I'm just like you. I'm not perfect. But if we don't address the demand, we're never going to have any change. I go into churches a lot, and I always get groups that say one of two things. Sometimes they say both. We're going to stop sex trafficking. Okay, no, you're not. Let's just get that out there. You're not going to stop it. We can affect it. We can reduce it. We can educate, and we should educate to reduce it, but you're always going to have a certain segment of the population that's going to do what they're going to do. The other thing that they say is, we're going to raise $5 million and we're going to open a safe house for survivors. Okay. Let me just say this about that. Just because you have $5 million doesn't mean you should open a safe house. I won't call any organizations out, but there have been some pretty prominent organizations in Chicagoland that did just that and closed it 9 months later, and the money's gone. And they actually did more harm than good to the survivors. There's a lot of that going on. A lot of people will tell me after one of these discussions, oh, thank God I have sons. Thank God I have sons. Well, why? I mean, yeah, sons are awesome. I have one. They're awesome. But do you think you can't be affected because you have sons? I was at the Super Bowl last year in Los Angeles. Not the game. I'll talk about this at length here in a few. But we go out, and one of the things that we do is we assist federal law enforcement in locating kids and adults who are being trafficked around the Super Bowl. And I'll get into that here in a few at length. A quarter of the victims they found were male. All of the offenders they arrested were male. So just because you have sons doesn't mean this is just gonna like scoot past you. Like it's no problem. I tell people often, one of the biggest problems I see related to sex trafficking can be summed up as this, and this will make me sound even older than I am. But somewhere along the timeline of my life, 51 years, we stopped as a society, I'm not saying everyone, but as a society, we stopped raising our boys to be real men and be gentlemen and appreciate women and not just see women as some toy. But we've also stopped raising our daughters to be proud of who they are, not just for the beauty on the outside, but for the intellect in their brain and the peace in their heart. We need to get back to that. We really need to get back to that. I look at my kids every day. My kids are 25, 21, and 17. Two girls, my oldest and youngest are girls, and Tyler's in the middle. And I'll never forget the night that Tyler was born. We're in the hospital. My wife was conked out. I think she was tired from something the night. But I was walking around this hospital room holding my son, talking with him. You see, my dad was not a good example of a man. My dad was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and there was pornography all over the house, and he used to hit my mom a lot. And I didn't want to have kids for the longest time until I met my wife. But that night, walking around the hospital with Tyler, I looked into my son's eyes, and I said, if I don't do anything else in your life, I will teach you to be a good man. And it started that night. I get really frustrated when people tell me, oh, I had to talk with my son, and it was really rough. I'm like, brother, your son's 16. He probably could have educated you more on what he knows than what you know. And, you know, we need to have the conversations. It's not the talk. So anyway, I'll come back to where I was at. So meeting with Homeland Security, 2.5 hours into this meeting, he starts showing me pictures. I said, what do tattoos have to do with any of this stuff? If we go to the next one, this is the first tattoo I saw, a barcode tattoo. What in our daily life has barcode on it? Everything we buy, right? People ask me all the time, Chris, I have a scanner on my phone. What happens if I scan that barcode? Does anything happen? No, it's not a functional barcode. It's just a visual symbol of you're a piece of product. You're not a human being. I don't care about you. I could buy, sell, trade, or throw you away whenever I feel like it. Because you see, one of the most alarming statistics they told me that day is less than 1% of those who are trafficked are ever found alive. And that made me sick. This visual made me sick too when I saw this picture, because it made me sick on 3 different levels. First and foremost, as a man, it made me sick that other men are out there paying for sex. And this is a piece of product, and I don't care about you. You're not a human being. I can do whatever I want. Secondly, as a father, it made me sick because they showed me pictures of these kids, and they were kids that looked just like mine and yours and your neighbors. And third, on a different level that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, is as an artist. See, I'm deeply, deeply attached to the tattoo world. I love the art. I love how it's grown. I've loved how it's changed. I love what it represents now, for the most part. This is the second time in modern world history that I've seen tattoos used as something disgusting and destructive. The first, of course, being the Germans' use of it at Auschwitz. And they asked me, they said, Chris, would you be willing to expand your ministry to help remove or cover these tattoos for these survivors so they don't have to look at it every day for the rest of their lives or be asked about it? And I said, John, you could have asked me that about 2 hours ago and we'd be doing some right now. That's the silliest question I've ever had posed to me in my life. Of course I will help them. And then what was funny is I got a phone call the next week from the FBI. And they said, Chris, we've spoken to Homeland Security and we want to talk to you. Then I got a phone call from the U.S. Attorney's Office, then the State Department in D.C., and all these safe houses started calling, and before I knew it, we were getting phone calls from all over the country to cover and remove sex trafficking tattoos. So I'm going to walk you through a few examples of these. If we go to the next slide, the tattoo on the left says cowboy with an upside-down horseshoe. This was actually the very first trafficking case that I got to help be a part of helping these survivors. Alex the Cowboy Campbell was a pimp in Chicago. He had 17 girls working in massage parlors, strip clubs, online, on the streets, you name it. And he was arrested and prosecuted. I was in a meeting for church. I was an elder at my church at the time, and my buddy from FBI sent me a message, and it was a news story from that previous day. Campbell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the judge was quoted in this article as saying, I'm giving you life based on the heinous nature of the crimes. I mean, this guy was the worst of the worst, absolutely brutal, unbelievable stories. But I'm taking away the chance for parole because of the way you branded these girls with tattoos and you marked them as your property. And they're going to have to look at that for the rest of their lives and be reminded what you put them through. And I was like, So I sent him a message back. I said, get me the prosecutor. 2 minutes later, literally 2 minutes later, my cell phone rang, and it was Anita Alvarez, who was the Cook County district attorney at the time, who prosecuted Campbell. And she said, oh my gosh, Chris, this is amazing. I just heard what you do. Can you help them? I said, I'll do anything I can do to help them, absolutely. It took me just over a year to remove and or cover all the tattoos for these girls. They all had that tattoo on the side of their neck here, and some of them had additional tattoos. Nicknames, vulgar images. There was one girl named Danielle. She was this tiny little thing. She was like 90 pounds, 5'2", and she had broken his 10 rules that he had for all his girls so many times. He called them his 10 commandments, which made me even more angry at him. Tattooed these rules down her back, and it took a year to remove it all. I'm going to fast forward you about 4 or 5 years. I reached out to one of my law enforcement friends, and I said, hey, this guy's being housed in Terre Haute, Indiana, and I want to see if I can meet with him. My pastor had been working on me for a long time. He said, Chris, I love what you do for the survivors, and I love that you do the education stuff, but I think you need to pray for this guy. I think you need to pray for this guy. And finally I broke, and I was like, I'll do it. Got me in there. I went and sat with this guy in Terre Haute, Indiana, Federal Penitentiary, for about 20 minutes. And I laid out 17 pictures of the girls with their tattoos. And I took them and I threw them in the trash. And I laid out 17 after pictures with all those tattoos gone. And he cussed me up one side and down the other. He stood up. Don't worry, I had all kinds of guards in there with me. I wasn't going one-on-one with this guy. I let him say what he wanted to say, and then I did pray for him. And it was the hardest prayer I've ever prayed in my life, but I did pray for him. Like I said, I'm a work in progress. A lot of the old Chris creeps up sometimes, and I don't like it, but it was one of those things that after I went, I had a long time to sit and process that on my ride home from Terre Haute. And all I heard was, well done, well done. And I'll never forget that afternoon. I gave him my address, and I gave him a Bible. I hope one day I hear from him. Time will tell. I've seen Jesus do crazier things. The tattoo on the right says Kevin Johnson's property. It's across her lower back. Kevin Johnson was her husband, believe it or not. We see this a lot. We see a lot of people trafficked by husbands, mom or dad, cousins, relatives, uncles. We see it more than you would want to imagine. But Kevin Johnson was her husband. She was a school teacher in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And she was an elementary school teacher. So he would take her to school, pick her up from school. She had no control over her comings and goings. They were both addicted to methamphetamine, so he would force her to go out and prostitute at night to get the money they needed for their drugs for the next day. So we got that taken care of for her. If we go to the next one. So this young woman was trafficked mostly down in Springfield, Illinois, and went through a safe house program down there that we love. And she had the words realist B across the back of her hands. She was addicted to drugs, got clean, got sober, went through her safe house program, went to school, got a business degree, and she started a landscape architecture business. And then she heard about us on the radio. WBGL talked about us. She called us and wanted to come up. And I said, come on up. Sit down, and I talked to her. Now, a lot of times when I'm talking to a survivor of trafficking specifically, and they say, well, I want to do a cover-up. See, a cover-up is a one-shot deal. They come in, we do it, it's done. They move on. A removal, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes, is a multi-step process. So more often than not, they'll opt to cover it up. So I was sitting there talking with her, and she's telling me her story, trying to figure out a design. Because, see, I like to do things that symbolize growth, transformation, beauty from something not so beautiful, that kind of thing, something encouraging, so when she looks at it, it's not just a tattoo, right? I'm very strongly believing that tattoos should be meaningful, all right? And sitting there talking to her, and she's talking about landscape architecture. She's hired other survivors after they finish the program and helping them start, and it's just a really cool thing. And I said, well, what are your favorite flowers? She's like, oh, I love roses. My grandma's name was Rose. I love roses. I always have. If we go to the next picture, there's her cover-up. So we did 2 black and gray roses, and I actually just saw her 3 weeks ago. She came to visit and brought another survivor to get a cover-up. So really cool just to keep in touch with them and see, it's not just they went through this horrible stuff, they got rescued, but look what God's doing in their lives now. That's the coolest part about what I get to do. I have a front row seat to watch Jesus fix people. I say it all the time, like, he does the heavy lifting. I just tattoo them. But Jesus heals their heart and their soul, and we heal their skin, and we try to meet in the middle and lift them up. That's all it is. That's all we do, right? All right, we can go to the next one here. So we do removals as well. So we use a non-laser process called Tattoo Vanish, the saline-based product. And it is a multi-step process to remove a tattoo, but we can completely remove the tattoo 100%. The cool thing about Tattoo Vanish is it actually physically pulls the ink from their skin. It doesn't scar like laser. It doesn't take away the pigmentation of their skin like laser does. Doesn't do any of that. So just a sample of that. We love that. In addition to our shop, we travel across the country to do this stuff, and I'm also in 10 different jails and prisons every month to do this stuff, and I love it. I joke when I travel, again, I'm going to talk about the Super Bowl in a minute, but I'll be heading to Phoenix for that work soon, and I set it up to speak in 2 prisons, a men's prison and a women's prison, and then I'm speaking at a church while I'm out there too afterwards. I always speak in the prisons first, and then I go into the church and I tell them that I would trade all those prisoners for people in church because they know what faith really is. They've been to the lowest of the low. And when you're deep in trouble, it's pretty amazing to see what Jesus can do. A lot of us, and I'm accused of this now. I accuse myself of it. And it's very easy to see the goodness of God when you're riding high, everything's good, and you got a new job, or you got a new grandchild, or you got a new house, or whatever. Everything's good. But Jesus does his best work in the pits, in the trenches. So we love that. All right, let's talk about Lake County a little bit. If we go to this next slide. Massage parlors. How many of you have seen massage parlors as you drive around? Okay, so there's good massage parlors and there's terrible massage parlors, all right? And I did a little digging. We have a website that I got from my federal law enforcement folks where these people, I refuse to call them men, these people who go into these massage parlors to pay for sex will go on this website and they'll write reviews. And I printed one out, so afterwards, if anyone wants to read it, and I'm going to warn you, it's not suitable for church, okay? They write descriptive reviews of the person, the process, how much they paid, what happened, everything that occurred. So I pulled up a list of the cities in Lake County. And I went through this website and looked at how many massage parlors there were that had these types of reviews. In Lake County, there were 62. And I met with Cinda, and Cinda and I were talking about this, and obviously I know UPC is in Grays Lake. So I looked up Grays Lake. There's 0 in Grays Lake, which is good news, bad news, right? Sin travels. We all have cars, right? There's 62 of these spots in Lake County alone. Buffalo Grove, which I know is partially Cook County and partially Lake County, so let me say that. Doesn't really matter, but they're 14 in Buffalo Grove. So I'm calling that police department tomorrow. A lot of people ask me, Chris, how do I know, how can I differentiate a good massage parlor from a shady one? Well, shady ones, a lot of the times, most of the times, they'll have everything blacked out in the front windows. You cannot see into these places at all. They'll have blacked out curtains, right? Another surefire sign that's a shady spot is there's a doorbell and you have to be allowed into the place, right? Another thing that I always tell people, if you suspect it and you're a woman, call there or go, maybe don't go in there, but call and try and make an appointment for a massage. They will not massage females. They won't do it because you're not their demographic. Because they're really not there to massage anybody, right? And we see that a lot. If we go to the next slide, I blacked out all the horrible stuff, okay? That's what those purple bars are. But this is a screenshot of that review site. And I went through and read these things and printed off a lot of them to send over to law enforcement folks. And I had somebody from the Lake County Coalition Against Trafficking reach out to me, which is fantastic. I'm going to use that connection big time because they don't want this stuff going on. And we have the information, so we've been doing this for 10 years. We'd love to share that with law enforcement folks all the time. In fact, when everything happened, I love our police, love them. And I'll tell you, that's a really vast change from when I was a kid. Growing up in LA with the LAPD and the Rodney King thing and all that, the riots were 3 blocks from my house. I had a much different view of law enforcement than I do now, okay? I love our cops. And when everything happened in Minnesota with George Floyd, the wave of people are like, we need to defund the police. Wrong. We need to flood our police with funding so they can get training. Did you guys know that it takes more hours of training in the state of Illinois to be a hairdresser than a police officer? I do trainings for local police departments all the time on sex trafficking and how to identify gang tattoos because they don't get that training. Aurora, second biggest city in the state, huge gang problem. They had me come in and teach their guys and women how to identify gang tattoos and graffiti. Like, that's not okay. So we need to do better at that. Oh, I already gave you away the answer to this next one. 62, right? And I'll tell you, you might be sitting there thinking, well, is that average? Is that more or less than other places? I would say it's on, believe it or not, it's on the lower side, probably below average as far as a county goes. I live in Kendall County. I live in Oswego, a town of 36,000 people, I believe. We have 12 massage parlors. And people say, Chris, why don't they just go in and shut them down? Just arrest everybody, shut them down. Well, first of all, we don't want to arrest the women who are there because they're not there of their own free will. They're being forced to do this. The other problem with these massage parlors is a lot of them are owned by a group, right? So they have many, many, many of these massage parlors across the country. But the people who own it aren't even in the country. They're overseas, and they have cameras set up, and they're just collecting money, just funneling right to them. So it's hard. It's difficult. We want law enforcement to be able to go after the whole network and rescue those girls. Then, yeah, take the people down that need to be taken down, but we don't want to arrest the victims. So, huge issue. Another big issue, escort services. If we go to this next one, I blacked out the names and numbers to protect the guilty, but there's 3 escort companies in Lake County, okay? And that number is kind of inconsequential because pimps and traffickers don't necessarily work for the escort services. They do it all online. And I'm going to talk about that here when I talk about the Super Bowl in a minute. If we go to the next one, I blacked a lot of stuff out here, obviously, for obvious reasons. But this was an example of an ad for Lake County for a girl. Now, these ads, the pictures, videos, whatever on the ad, they always say that they're 18. They're not 18. You look at them sometime and you're like, that girl's 12, 13, 14 years old. And then when they get recovered, you find out that they're 11 or 12. It's maddening. But this stuff is happening. You know, there's people within 6 blocks of here that are online right now trying to buy. Or they're going to a massage parlor. Yeah, it's happening everywhere. You know, I've had situations in churches that I know where I've had guys come up to me and they're like, I need to sit and talk with you, but I need it to be confidential. I'm like, okay. And they've come in, they sat down with me and they're like, Chris, I have done this before. And I'm getting help. I don't want to be that person anymore. I was addicted to pornography and it led me down a path or whatever the case may be. This is happening, and we're not talking about it. It's phenomenal that we're doing this here tonight. I love this, and that's one of the things I love about UPC. I've been coming here the last number of years to talk about the ministry and what we do, because it's great to see churches that aren't afraid to talk about the ugly truth in our community, right? I want to talk to you about the Super Bowl. We can go to that next slide. It's just my knuckles. When I go to a church and I tell people I'm going to the Super Bowl in 8 days, all the guys are like, oh, lucky. I've never been to the game. I'm a Bears fan and a Raiders fan. It doesn't matter, 'cause we're not going, right? Justin Fields can't do it all on his own. But I've been going to the Super Bowl for the last 9 years now, and we do a couple things. First thing I do is I do cover-ups. So being a national provider for the FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. attorneys, State Department, all this stuff, they get a notification where I'm going, when I'll be there, how to contact me. And I had, at last count, 29 appointments set up for while I'm in Phoenix for 10 days. But in addition to that, I do cover-ups all the time. One of the things that we've been doing for the last number of years is we help law enforcement go and find people who are being trafficked around the Super Bowl. Now, a lot of people are like, trafficking around the Super Bowl? What are you talking about? Well, it's not just the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is oftenly discussed as the biggest trafficking event of the year. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. I know it happens a whole lot. Our job is not nearly as exciting or adrenaline-filled as the law enforcement officers who get to go kick in doors and arrest people and tackle people and all that. We have a team, we go down, we set up in a command center, and we have a few different tools at our disposal for that. We work with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So they come in with their database of all their missing posters, all the kids that have been reported missing across the country. Then we have a piece of software. Have any of you guys heard, you may have seen on social media over the years, talking about, oh, the actor Ashton Kutcher is such a huge advocate against trafficking and he does all this stuff. He has done some pretty amazing things. One of those things is he's a really, really smart guy as far as technology goes. He helped create a platform called Spotlight. Spotlight is a piece of software that you can go out and you can set up a geographic perimeter on the computer. And it'll go out onto the web, the dark web, all the ugly, dark places of it, and it'll pull in every escort ad, every sex ad that's out there. So we have that database. So we take that database, we crash it against the posters from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and we look for possible matches because they all have pictures and videos and stuff like that. And it'll pull those aside. Then we have another partner who joins us at the Super Bowl, a company called Securus. Securus, they exist because they record and archive every single phone call that goes out from a prison or a jail to the community, in every jail, every prison in this country. Because a lot of that information on those phone calls is used for evidence, right? Because a lot of criminals aren't very smart and they'll totally admit to killing people on phone calls to their loved ones. So we take their database and we pull any phone calls that match those escort ads. You're like, Chris, why? Because there's a lot of pimps, traffickers, and gang members locked up right now that still run their business from jail and prison. I'm telling you, I go in prisons and jails all month long, and I have very honest conversations with these guys. And I'm like, man, you guys are so smart. Why couldn't you use that for good? You know? Why couldn't you use your brain for something positive? And they're like, I know, as soon as I get out of here. And it's amazing to see what they can do when they get out. And we love working with those folks too. So we sit and we listen to those phone calls, and that is hard to listen to. You have a pimp screaming at a girl who's, she's a meth addict, and she hasn't had a fix in like 3 days, and she's not in a good way. And he's like, you better get back out there or I'm going to send so-and-so after you, or after your kids or your sister or brother or whatever. And we listen to all that information. We pull all these pictures. We pull all this information. We hack into these victims' social media platforms. It's really easy. Everybody that has social media, y'all think you're so safe. It's so not safe. I don't care how high your security level is. We hack into those things because they'll post where they're working at, if they're working at a club or if they're working at a massage parlor, what area they're working, how to call them. We put it's called a one sheet. We put a list of documentation together for these cops. We're like, go do what you do. And they do. And they'll call us and like, all right, we just found so-and-so and so-and-so. We have these posters all over the wall, like wallpaper. And we go up and take a red marker and write recovered across their picture. I'll tell you a story. I was in Tampa Bay, Florida, a couple of years ago for the Super Bowl. And we were doing this work, and my third day there, it was like the 12th hour of the day. I was exhausted. I was pretty hangry and frustrated. We weren't finding as many as we had hoped and prayed for. And the way it works is there's about 50 of us in this command center doing this work, and they would assign us one case at a time. And we'd go and do all of our work, present it to the officers, and then do another one. So I'm sitting there, and I get my next poster. And it's a 15-year-old girl named Amber Rosas. from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. And I froze. I absolutely froze when I looked at this girl's picture, because she looked exactly like my 15-year-old daughter. Exactly like her. I'll show you. If you want to see it after, come see me. I've got the pictures on my phone of both. And it shook me up so much, I excused myself and went up and called my wife and my daughter on FaceTime. And I told them what was going on. I showed them the picture. They cried, I cried, we prayed. Then I hung up and I prayed some more. And I learned a lot about Jesus through that situation. My prayer was, Lord, please take away this spiritual warfare, because I was sure Satan was trying to get me to stop doing what I was doing for Jesus at that moment by shaking me up with this picture. So I went back down, I did the work, I presented it to these two officers, and I said, guys, I need you to do me a favor, and I would never ask you this, but I need you to do this, because I know you're going to find this girl. I just had a peace. I knew they were going to find her. I said, I need to know that she's safe when you find her. I don't need to see her. I don't need to talk to her, because we don't do that at that point. I just need to know she's alive and safe. I said, no problem, we got you. They went out that night. They had no luck that night. They went out the second night, and they were about 7 minutes behind her. They missed her by about 7 minutes. The third night, they found her with another girl and the trafficker and two Johns who they arrested, and the trafficker as well. And they said, hey, Chris, we just want to let you know she's safe. We have her, and here's the situation. And we're transporting them to the hospital. So what we have is, when we do this operation every year at Super Bowl, they have a wing of a hospital that's empty except for this operation. So there's trauma counselors on hand, there's doctors, nurses, chemical dependency folks that can help them if they're addicted. They can start that process. It's just a safe place to get them in there, get them checked out, get them cleaned up before they're transported to a safe house, right? And they said, we're taking them to the hospital, and if you want to see her, you can see her from like behind the glass. She'll be down the way, but if you want to see her, and I don't know why, I still don't know why completely, but I was like, yeah, I'll be there. I left. It's like a 10-minute drive, and I walk in, and there's a big glass partition, and I wish I hadn't done it. I wish I hadn't done it, because I see her, they point her out, and I don't know how they located this girl, because she didn't look anything like the picture. What I saw that night in that hospital was a version of my baby girl, battered, malnourished, addicted to methamphetamine with open sores all over her little body. I went back out to my car afterwards, and I called my wife and my daughter to tell them the situation. And I sat there trying to compose myself for like 30 minutes, and it was a rough go. And I was driving back to the command center, and I was tired. I was like, I just need to sleep through this. But I was praying on the drive back to the command center. I was like, God, thank you so much for finding them, bringing the trafficker to justice without incident. And I want to thank you also for breaking that spiritual attack. And it was the craziest thing, because it's like the answer that I got to that. See, I talk with God when I pray. I do it in my car a lot. People probably think I'm crazy, wondering who I'm talking to, but I don't care. And the answer that I got was alarming. He said, Chris, I know it's going to be hard for you to believe, but this whole scenario was not spiritual warfare, was not spiritual attack. It was not meant to take you off of doing what you're doing. I put this in motion. I was like, no. Now Satan's talking in Jesus' voice to me. This is not cool. He said, I know this was extremely hard for you the last 3 days because she looks like your little girl. He said, they're all mine. So please go back to work. I stopped at 7-Eleven. I bought 3 of those 5-hour energy shots, and I pounded them all. I stayed up for 2 days looking for kids. And I'll tell you, my daughter and I, Quinn, my youngest daughter, the one that looked like Amber, she said to me when I got home, Amber was going to a drug rehab facility in Indianapolis and then to a safe house after that. And Quinn looked at me and she goes, Dad, do you think I could meet her at some point? I was like, I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. Pray about it. See what happens. See what God does. She went through her detox from meth, brutal detox. And then she got transferred to a safe house in Chicagoland. And she didn't have any tattoos that she needed removed or covered, which was great. But I had told the director of this facility, who I'm very close with, I said, hey, if she ever gets to a point where she wants to talk with another young woman, my daughter is praying and would love at some point, if it's ever possible, to just sit and talk to her. And that took place 6 months ago. And it was one of the coolest things for me to see as a dad. You know, my kids are growing up. I'm 6 months away from being an empty nester, and I don't know how I'm going to deal with that yet. It's tough. My oldest moved out during the pandemic with her fiance. My son just moved out like 6 weeks ago. And now she's going to go to Marquette for nursing school next year. And I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I'll tell you, I've never been more proud to be their dad. See, I loved it when they were little. Baseball games, softball games, whatever, going to all their activities. But at this point, I'm seeing them develop into who God intended them to be. And again, it's not perfect. They still do some things that make me shake my head, as I do with them. But my kids have great hearts. See, my kids have grown up around this ministry for the last 10 years, and I've exposed them to things that a lot of kids would never be exposed to. Sex trafficking survivors, former gang members, former inmates who have committed murder, done some pretty terrible things, but been transformed by Jesus. Domestic violence survivors, self-harm survivors, you name it, they've had experience meeting people and hearing the stories of how Jesus transformed these people. This ministry is not me, it's my family, because Jesus called all of us to it, and we're all very centered in it. We love it. You know, one of the things that happened that I was really proud of, this is years ago. When we started doing the trafficking stuff, my oldest daughter, Mackenzie, she would come in and hear some of these stories and just kind of observe everything. She's like, Dad, like, I had an idea today at school, something I think you should include in the ministry. And I was tired. I had just finished a trafficking cover-up. And when I finish a trafficking cover-up, I am very somber, very just quiet, reflecting, praying, all that, exhausted mentally. And the old Chris would have been like, yeah, great, I need more work to keep me busy. But I didn't. I said, well, what's your idea? Tell me about it. She said, well, I hear some of these survivors tell us that they were lured in by social media. Somebody reached out to them in a direct message and said, oh, I saw you at school today. I'm new in town. You're really pretty. Can we talk? And then it progresses down a horrible path. And she said, Dad, why don't you teach a social media safety class? Because I talk to all my friends at school, and their parents are not nearly as hands-on with our social media, like how you guys are with our social media. I sat back in my chair and I said, Kenzie, that's an awesome idea. I love that idea. You're right. I think you should do that. And she got terrified. She started to sweat a little bit over her eye. Her eyes got real big, and she was 16 at the time. And she's like, Dad, they're not going to listen to me. Like, I looked at her, I said, you know what, Mac? Nobody knows social media better than a 16-year-old girl. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, how about if we teach it together? So we did. We went to the FBI Internet Crimes Against Children group, sat down, met with them, told them Mackenzie's idea, and we said, can you guys help us put a curriculum together for this? I said, absolutely, no problem. We've been teaching that class ever since. She's 25 now. My youngest, Quinn, she kind of took it over. My oldest daughter, Mackenzie, who started everything, is a hairstylist and extremely busy and traveling and all that thing, planning a wedding. So Quinn has now stepped up and teaches the class with me. We go into the schools all the time. Because when I started the ministry, I was like, this is cool. I just covered another tattoo today. I'd post pictures of it on social media, and people were like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know you could do that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we do. But at the end of the day, I'm sitting there thinking about it and praying. I'm like, how do we keep people out of this chair? How do we keep them from getting victimized or going through this stuff? And how do I not have to do so many of these cover-ups? I'd rather talk and educate them and have them go through that. So my wife and I started speaking in schools, junior highs, high schools, free of charge. Everything we do is free. And we've given over $1.5 million in services away for free in 10 years. And that's the coolest thing that God ever did in my life. Because there was years when I lived in LA still, pre-Jesus, where I made $150,000 a year and I hated my life so much I wanted to end it. I was trying to fill the void in my heart with stuff. I was addicted to what society told me I needed to be fulfilled with. And then Jesus is like, you don't need any of that garbage. I'm going to show you what's good. I'm going to show you what's real. And he does every single day. I had a young woman come in last night. Broke my heart. It happens all the time. She works at a local restaurant where my wife and I will go and eat once in a while. We don't go out so much anymore, but we will go to this restaurant, and we see her all the time. We didn't know any of her story. She's always very nice when we come in, and one of her coworkers called me and said, hey, she has a tattoo from an ex that she'd like to cover up. I said, no problem, I got it. Bring her in. We set up the appointment. It was last night at 5 o'clock. And she came in and it had her ex's name on her shoulder blade. No problem. We came up with the design, got everything ready to go. And we're talking, and as they often, almost always do, when they become comfortable with us, they tell us their whole story. Because being a tattoo artist or a bartender or a hairstylist, you're an amateur therapist whether you want to be or not, right? And she poured out everything, and I'm listening to this woman's story. One of the biggest gifts that Jesus has given to me in my new life is the ability to listen before I talk. See, I was an action guy before. You come to me with a problem, I got 6 solutions for you. One of them's going to work. Now, I want to take it all in. I want to listen to you because that's what they want. They don't want to be told how to fix their lives. They want to be validated. They want to be heard. So that's what we're there to do. So I'm listening to this young woman tell me her story. And she said, yeah, I was kind of in between like living arrangements, and I met this woman, and she said I could stay with her. She had an extra bedroom in her apartment. And she was cool, I knew her, but I didn't know what she did for work. I was like, okay. She's like, well, I found later she was a prostitute. I was like, okay. I've heard this story before. And she was telling me about how this guy, who ended up becoming her boyfriend, came over one day, and they were having a couple of drinks, and he put something in her drink. And she woke up 2 days later, and it was this on again, off again thing. She didn't do any drugs or anything before that. He got her addicted to methamphetamine. And then she got kicked out of the woman's apartment because she got close to this guy, and the guy ended up being the woman's pimp. So she was losing business, so she got mad and kicked her out. Well, the now boyfriend says, come live with me, but this is what you got to do. So he's forcing her to go out and prostitute. And I'm very delicately talking with her, and I said, she's like, the whole time she's like, but I wasn't like trafficked. I wasn't trafficked though. I wasn't trafficked. And at the end of it, I sat there with her and I said, I hate that I'm the one that has to tell you this, and this is not unusual at all. This happens a lot. You were trafficked and you didn't realize it because he was your boyfriend, and you thought that's what you had to do for your boyfriend because you loved him. And she broke down harder than I did in Joan's office. And I just sat with her and listened to her, and her friend was with us too. One of my things is whenever I'm doing a trafficking or a domestic violence cover-up, I will always, always, always have another female in the room. Billy Graham, God bless him, taught me that. Because then there's a couple reasons. First and foremost, I want this survivor to have whoever they're comfortable with. If it's a friend, if it's their counselor, their crisis intervention specialist, whatever, because they have PTSD a lot. And I'm a really good listener, but I'm not trained in how to help people that are triggering from PTSD. So I want them to be as comfortable as possible. And then on the flip side of that, I'm working with people who've been terribly victimized by men. And guys, let's just all be honest with each other. I don't look like the nicest guy on the outside, necessarily, okay? And I probably look like a lot of the men who abuse them. So I don't ever want to put myself or any of my team in a vulnerable position where they could say, oh, he said this, or, because I have had so many of these survivors tell me at the end of covering their tattoo, they look at me and they're like, you're probably the first man ever in my entire life that did something for me and didn't expect something in return for it. That's heartbreaking. That's why we have to do whatever we can do to end this stuff. One of the things I always kind of land on at the end of my discussions in churches is I'm not that special. I'm really not. If my wife was here, she's sick tonight. She was sorry she wasn't able to come, but when I speak in churches and people come up and we talk after, because again, I like to talk and meet people, women will say stuff to Lisa, and they're like, your husband's amazing. He's so wonderful. And she's like, yeah, he still leaves his dirty clothes on the bathroom floor. She's very humbling. But I'm not special. I'm not any different than anybody. All I did was I prayed and I asked God, what do you want me to do? How can I do this? And again, the most terrifying prayer I ever said in my life was, Lord, I want you to break my heart for what breaks yours. Be very careful with that one, because he'll give it all to you. I'll never say that I've seen it all in the last 10 years. I've seen a lot, and I know it gets worse, and I know it gets darker. But as long as I feel like as long as I'm focused on him, everything's going to be okay. I always tell people, pray and ask him, Lord, what gifts have you given me that I can use to help make a difference in someone else's life? And I'm going to give you an example of one that I got that is near and dear to my heart, because we've become very close friends with this young woman. I spoke in a church in Aurora, this is like 8-9 years ago. And I said that very thing. I said, go and ask God what he wants you to do. He'll put you to work. And she said, I really took that to heart. She said, I'm a massage therapist at Massage Envy, and I didn't think that I could use that for any kind of ministry. And she's like, but I want to tell you what he gave me to do. I said, I'd love to hear it. So she comes in, we're sitting there, me and my wife and this young woman, and she said, I was a victim of multiple sexual assaults in high school and college. I'm like, oh, every time I hear that, it's like a gut punch, like, ugh. And she said, I didn't think that I'm very passionate about my massage work. I help people heal from injuries and ailments. And she said, so I started asking God, like, what can I do? And she told me, she said, I started an outreach program where I do massage therapy for sexual assault and incest survivors to show them that physical touch doesn't have to be terrifying anymore. Like, that's Jesus. That's Jesus giving you that. He brought you through that so you could help other people who have gone through things like you. That's what he does. He dusts us off, picks us up, and lets us go to work to build the kingdom. That's what it's all about. And I love that. In 9 days, I'm on an airplane to Phoenix. And it's been rough since the pandemic. It's been very rough for all ministries. We're not unique to that. We've been doing fundraising for the ministry for this trip specifically because we do a couple things when we go to the Super Bowl. We do these cover-ups, but then when either girls or boys are recovered from trafficking, law enforcement takes everything they own. Literally the clothes that they're wearing, they give them new clothes to wear. But if they have a purse, a backpack, and it's gone, it's evidence. So we put together, they're called Fresh Start bags. I learned this from a great organization, very near and dear to our hearts in Wichita, Kansas, called ICTSOS. And they were the ones that gave us this idea. So we go out and we get backpacks donated, and we fill them with toothbrushes, toiletry items. We go to the airlines and ask them for or the hotels and ask them for the little shampoos and lotions and all that stuff. We put together the aftercare kits for when I cover the tattoos of those who are getting cover-ups. All that stuff. Ink, needles, all the things I need to do the work that I do to help them. This stuff has, since the pandemic, gone through the roof. Gloves, for example. I'll go through 2 boxes of surgical gloves a day. Before the pandemic, they were about $8 a box. Now, they're nearly $30 a box. Ink. We go through, this bottle of ink is $25. There's 60 bottles in a set, and I'll go through a whole set at Phoenix, covering up trafficking tattoos. And I love that. But we've been doing fundraising, and it's been, I think people are still scared of things. I know a lot of ministries are closing their doors, and Jesus is like, not gonna happen. You're gonna keep doing what I got you doing until I tell you to do something else. So we've gotten a little unique in our fundraising. I did a tattoo fundraiser for Friday the 13th is a big deal in the tattoo world. I don't believe in all that, Friday the 13th stuff. But most tattoo shops, they'll do like Ouija board tattoos and pentagrams. Obviously, I don't do anything like that. I don't do anything satanic, evil, derogatory towards women, drug-related, gang-related, alcohol-related, or vulgar in my shop, whether it's regular business or ministry. I don't do any of that. So I did these cute little single continuous line drawings of like dogs and cats and hearts, and it's all on our Facebook page and stuff. But we did it on Friday the 13th. I did 64 tattoos and 16 and a half straight hours of work, and the phone never stopped ringing that whole day. And I bet I'm still doing those tattoos. I was doing them right up until I left today to come here. So that's a fundraiser we did, but we're still about $1,000 shy of where we need to be. One of the things that we came up with that's kind of a fun thing for people, when I do a cover-up tattoo for somebody, I'll generally use 10 to 15 different colors in a tattoo. I like things to be very vibrant, and out there, very loud. So when I'm getting ready to set up my station and everything, I'll pull all the ink that I'm going to use out, and it sits on my station. But what we decided to do is we're going to put the person's name that donated on a bottle of ink. And every single time, that person that I'm helping will see that bottle of ink there with a name on it, different names. And they say, Chris, like, why do they all have names on them? I'm like, well, these are all the people that help make your tattoo cover up possible. Because it shows them that it's the body of Christ. It's people that believe in second chances. People that believe you shouldn't have to stare at that pimp's name on your neck another minute, or that gang symbol on your arm. And it's really powerful for people to see that. Very cool side story. This particular ink bottle I just randomly grabbed out of my case. The name is Ricardo Ramirez Jr. Ricardo Ramirez Jr. is a former Latin king from Aurora who came to the Lord when he was in prison, got saved, left the gang. They almost killed him and his brother because of it. He started a construction business, moved down to Florida. Amazing guy. What he does is he will only hire former gang members or former inmates to give them a second chance. It was really cool. I was sitting there looking at the name when I pulled it out of my bag. I didn't know which one I grabbed. And it just made me smile a little bit. So if people can donate. People can donate either tonight. They can donate on our website, ink180.com. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not rushing out of here. I would love to answer questions for you guys, talk with you. But we have some time, and I would love to, if you guys have some questions, I would love to answer any questions. You can ask me anything you want. I'm very easy to go. I'm not offendable at all. Yes?
Other than your fundraising,
Yeah.
regular donations, government money, any of that?
I wish. Government money's real green, isn't it? No, I get no funding assistance from the government whatsoever. Every bit of funding that we get, donation-wise, is just regular folks that want to help, that believe in second chances, and want to help us do our work. We have people that go on our website and do like a one-time donation. We also have people that go on, same place on our website, and you can set up like a monthly recurring donation. And the funny thing about that is, people are like, man, there's got to be somebody. I go on Moody Radio. I do all the local TV stuff, interviews and all that. They're like, why doesn't some company just write you a $100,000 check? And I'm like, as crazy as that sounds, I don't want that. I really don't. For a couple reasons. First reason is, when I started this ministry, I also prayed and said, Lord, just give me enough to do the work. I've seen me with excess, and it turns me into a different person, and I don't like that person. Just give me enough to do what you called me to do. The second reason is, I would rather have a whole bunch of people donate $20 than somebody write me a $100,000 check, because I know your heart's in it, and you believe in it. Companies don't care. That's a tax write-off to them, Because their first question is, oh, you guys are a 501c3, right? I'm like, yeah. Okay, cool. And yeah, that's cool, but I want people's hearts to be in it. So yeah. Yes.
So when you work with law enforcement and the FBI, do they help, or your fingers kind of free for all that?
It's all free. All free. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild to me. I look at a lot of, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of tattoo artists that absolutely hate my guts because I do it for free. And they're like, you're taking money off of our plate, and blah, blah. I'm like, no, hold up. The people that we help, they can't afford it. A lot of times they'll come in and I'm talking to them like, did you have something to eat today? Because before you get a tattoo, you should have some food in your stomach so you don't pass out. They're like, oh, I haven't eaten today yet. And it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, So I'm ordering Jimmy John's so they can have a sandwich so they don't pass out while I'm covering up their tattoo. like, guys, they don't have the money. Well, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't do it for free. I'm like, my accountant says the same thing. My accountant's this little old Jewish guy, and he thinks I'm absolutely out of my mind for giving away $1.5 million worth of free service. But he's like, I understand why you do that. I said, no, you don't. Yeah, so, yeah, I do regular business too. The way that breaks out, it's about 80% ministry work of the total and 20% regular paid business, just so I can live. But in that business, I'm very specific about what I will and won't do. Also, I always like to mention that. Like I said, I don't do anything demonic, vulgar, racist, drug-related, alcohol-related, or derogatory towards women. Like, I don't do, like, mermaids without tops and stuff like that. But another thing that I don't do is any part of your body that would be covered by a bikini, I don't tattoo it, because that's not for me to see. That's between you and your spouse at whatever point. And I've had some interesting altercations with, like, college-age girls. And I'll tell you this one, but there was a group of 5 college girls that came in one Friday night. And this girl wanted 2 stars, about the size of a $50. I said, okay, yeah, no problem, I can do that. So I'm drawing it up, and I said, well, where do you want to place the tattoos? And she said, oh, I want them right here. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to do that. I'm not tattooing that. And she looks at me and she said, why, are you gay? I said, wow. And all of her friends were like, I can't even believe you said that. And I said, I'm not. Thanks for asking. I'm not. That should matter to you at all. I said, but the fact of the matter is, I'm a Christian. I'm married. I love my wife. I have 2 daughters. And if anybody did that tattoo on one of my little girls, old Chris would come visit. And I said, besides, to do that tattoo, basically you're undressed completely, laying on a table, and I'm tattooing you. I said, do you really have that little self-respect that you want that to occur? She's like, well, I just want the tattoo. This girl wouldn't stop. And I said, listen, if you want that tattoo that bad, go down the street to Aurora. There's 12 shops in Aurora that would love to do that tattoo for you tonight, no problem. But what I want you to know, straight up, is they're going to be taking pictures. They're going to be making videos for TikTok. They're going to be saying things that you don't ever want to hear come out of another human being's mouth. And you're going to subject yourself to just a whole lot of ugly. Do you really want this tattoo that bad? So finally, she stomps out of the shop with her friends in tow. One of her friends that was there came in the next week to get a piercing from Lisa, ear piercing. And she came back. She's like, hey, can I talk to Chris for a minute? So she comes back in my room. And she said, hey, I just want to let you know, she did not end up getting the tattoo. She said it took her to, like, the next day to calm down. And we were all telling her, like, don't you understand? He was just trying to be a decent human being and make you think about it different. And finally it, like, clicked, I guess. But she didn't get the tattoo. So, yeah. I just don't understand people sometimes. And I do things that probably make other people's heads shake too, so it's all good. But I'm very convicted by that. Like, I'm not going to compromise my beliefs and my faith and what I'm about for some money. So. Now, another thing on that, so sometimes we have victims come in that might have a tattoo on their chest or maybe their backside or whatever, like a branding tattoo. So I have a female tattoo artist that we have do all those because we want them to feel as comfortable as possible, obviously, and me too. So we have Megan, who was my apprentice for 2 years, and now she's tattooing. She does those now. Yeah, oh, go ahead. Yeah, the non-laser tattoo removal is really cool. It's a product called Tattoo Vanish. I wish I would have invented it because I'd be living in Malibu right now, but it's a medical grade saline solution and citric acid mixed. So it's very concentrated. So what we do is we dip a needle in lidocaine on a tattoo machine and we go over the tattoo. Let's say it's on a teardrop on their face. We dip that needle in lidocaine, which numbs the area as we go over it, and we open up the top 3 layers of skin. Takes about 5 minutes usually. And then I take a cotton, like a Q-tip, dip it in the solution, this Tattoo Vanish solution, and I put it on there. It's a real thick gel, and it sits on that exposed skin for 10 minutes. What it does while it sits there, it goes in and it bites into the tattoo ink, and then the body rejects it because you don't need more saline solution or citric acid. So your body pushes it back out, but because it bonded to the ink, it pulls ink out with it. So yeah, it's really good stuff. Really good. Usually between 7 and 10. Yeah, that's the only downside of it. But my thing is, if the tattoo is on their, especially on their face, we see that a lot now because gangs are very involved in trafficking. If it's on their face or their neck, I really only want to do a removal because I want them to be able to go get a job and all that. Other than that, it's really their option. But it's a timely process. But it also gives us more time to get to know them and talk with them and listen. I've had people come in for regular tattoos and they're like, I almost didn't come to you because I know you're a Christian and I didn't want to get preached at for 2 hours. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I do that? And like, no, it was great. And I said, listen, let's tell Pastor this before we got started. When I came to Jesus at 38, I beat myself up for the first year. I was like, man, why was I so stupid for 38 years running away from you? I should have been there all along. And he said, don't beat yourself up. It took you 38 years of your life to figure out what kind of Christian you want to be. And it's never going to be the guy that stands on a soapbox outside Union Station with a megaphone telling people they're going to hell if they don't change their lives. I would rather you know how much I love Jesus by how I interact with you, listen to you, and just treat you with respect and kindness because that's what Jesus did. There was a question? Yeah. Oh, there's all kinds of solutions, yeah. So let me talk about that because I kind of skipped part of that, but it's a great question, thank you. There's all kinds of things people can do, right? My wife, and now some of this might sound a little bit alarming and shocking, my wife works with another ministry that we're partnered with called Eve's Angels. It's started by a woman named Annie Donewald, who was a student at Michigan State, got into the adult entertainment industry at a strip club, and then got trafficked and got out of it, found faith. What they do, they go into strip clubs and massage parlors and minister to the women. And I won't go because I'm a guy, and I'm like, I don't need to walk into that lion's den, but they love doing it. Education. We talk about the social media safety class. We go into the schools. We do all that. There's so much we can do. Working with legislators to work on new bills. The first bill that we did was about 6 years ago. Jeez, now. And it was a pretty simple one. It was a good entry-level law. But we wanted to be able to do tattoo removals for minors because you had to be 18. So I would have 14, 15, 16-year-old sex trafficking survivors who had to wait till they turned 18 to get their tattoos removed. And I was like, that's not cool. I would have to get a judge to sign off a waiver so I could do it, and that was a major pain. And we went down to Springfield with John Anthony, who was a state rep at the time, and we wrote it up. It passed unanimously through the House and the Senate, and Quinn signed it into law. It was one of his last things he signed into law before he left office. So that was cool. But our big fight right now is this whole thing about changing the punishments for the buyers. And we're going to need help with that big time. It's all that kind of stuff. It's not, a lot of people are like, well, I wish I could help, but I'm not a tattoo artist. Well, you don't have to be. There's people out there. I get phone calls from counselors. They're like, how can I help? I'm like, I'll put you in contact with a safe house right now. If you're a trauma counselor, I can get you working with them, no problem, volunteering. There's art therapy programs. There's all kinds of stuff, all kinds of ways to get involved. Because the thing with the safe houses, yes, we need more safe houses. We need more beds for survivors, 100%. But I've seen safe houses do much more harm than good in some instances. I've seen some do an amazing job, and a lot of them that we work with do an amazing job, and I love it. But they're people who are trained specifically in sex trafficking. Like Moody Bible Institute, I speak there all the time. I'm on Moody Radio all the time. I go in and speak to the students. They have a major where you can get a degree in working in the sex trafficking fight. And that, when it started, we were able to help influence them to change some things, because these kids would go through 4 years of school and never talk to a sex trafficking survivor. And they graduate and they go work for a safe house and they're like, I can't do this, it's too heavy. You need to put them in front of a survivor who's an advocate, who's a little bit further down the road in their recovery process and all that. You're not gonna put them in front of somebody right off the street, but like they need to be exposed to what they're gonna do, what they're gonna deal with. So there's all kinds of stuff. And we help people do that. Cinda, I hope it's okay if I talk about our discussion a little bit. You cool with that? So Cinda reached out to me and came down and met. We sat down and just talked for like an hour, hour and a half. And she's like, how can I help? I want to be of help. And we just kind of brainstormed things and came up with some ideas and ways to get the word out and all this stuff. And I'd like to do that too. I'd love to help people find kind of what it is. But I'll tell you, spoiler alert, I'm not Jesus. But he's really good at telling you what you can do. Any other questions? Yes. Sure. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I am a huge proponent of mental health care. I wasn't for a long time because when my dad was still in the picture when I was a kid, he would always say things like, suck it up, be a man, counseling's for girls, we don't do that garbage. Like, get over it. It's so bad when I think back about it. My life changed because a counselor decided to pray for me and my wife. And that saved my life. And that will never be forgotten with me. I talk about I go to counseling every week. I have my own PTSD that I deal with from when I was a kid. I went to bed every night pretty much to the sound of automatic gunfire and police helicopters and going to funerals and airbrushing funeral t-shirts for gang members. And it did things to me that I'm just now starting to figure out how to process. So my own mental health care for my own stuff has to get dealt with. But yeah, anytime, like last night I did this cover-up for this young woman. Anytime I do a sex trafficking cover-up, I'm in the counselor the next day. When I'm in Phoenix, we have trauma counselors as a part of our team that'll be there. So we'll have sessions every day. It is hard. It's hard. It's brutally hard. But I'll tell you, I've had a few times where I've gotten a little bit laxed on my healthcare, my mental health care, and I feel it. And my wife sees it real fast, and my accountability team sees it really fast, and they're like, hey, we need to gather up. We need to circle the horses real quick and talk, because you're going rogue right now, and we don't like it. So having great mental health care, which I do, thank God, an amazing wife who holds me accountable, and my accountability team, it's pretty hard for me to get off track now, thank God, because, you know, it's ironic when I look at my path and how I got to Joan's office, and I didn't tell this part of the story, and I don't know a lot, but I definitely don't have a problem with it. I'll share it. I talked about my friend Dante being murdered. Dante was a gang member. Dante had guns. His mom gave me one of his guns after he died. The reason she gave it to me is because she didn't trust any of the other guys with it. She's like, I know you won't do anything crazy with it. I was depressed to a level where I was suicidal. And I went out to a forest preserve in Plainfield, Illinois, 3 days before my wife approached me and said, I think that we should go and talk to someone. And I put that Glock 17 to my side of my head and I pulled the trigger and nothing happened. Now, I don't know how much you all know about guns, but Glocks don't jam. They're known for that. So I know that that was a God thing. And Joan praying for me saved my life. That's why that's one of the things I tell people too. Kind of going back to your question about like what else can we do? My whole life changed because a woman prayed for me who I didn't know. She was genuine, she was sincere, and she meant that prayer, and it changed the trajectory of my life. So when I hear people say, "Oh, I'm too far gone. I've done too much bad stuff." I hear this all the time when I go into the prisons and jails. I've messed up too much. God doesn't want me. I'm like, I've seen God turn people around. There's a guy I met at a speaking engagement at Willow Creek, Mike Franchese, New York crime boss. His dad, his own father, put out a hit on him for turning on this crime family from prison. And he found his way to Jesus, and the guy loves Jesus now. This dude was violent as all get out. He's like, I won't even tell you how many murders I committed. One thing I did ask him, I said, where's Jimmy Hoffa buried? And he goes, he's looked at me dead serious, and he goes, they'll never find him. It's like, dang, all right. Jesus is the best at reclamation projects, and dusting us off and pulling us up and giving us a fresh suit of armor to go to work and build this kingdom of God. And it's the coolest thing I've ever been able to be a part of. I genuinely love it. I wake up every single morning now and I pray and I'm like, man, I get to go to work today. It's never, I wish I could just sleep. I wish I could just do nothing today. It's never that. Because I know every single day that he wakes me up, he's going to give me something incredible to see or hear. And I love that. I love that. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Big time. The foster system is a huge recruiting ground for traffickers. Because my uncle is retired law enforcement in Iowa, and him and his wife are foster parents, and they've been doing it for years. And he actually trains people who want to become foster parents in Iowa. And he's actually had me come and do presentations with him to talk about it. But yeah, there's a lot of amazing foster parents out there, and God bless them, because it's tough. It is not easy sometimes, a lot of times. But for any good, there's also a bad segment of that population. And there's some people that are foster parents for the money, right? And they might have multiple kids they're fostering, and they don't necessarily report them when they go missing or run away. It's like, oh, they'll come back. They'll come back. And they don't want to lose out on that money because they look at it as income sometimes, right? So they're gone, and they're not even reported missing. That's one of the things that drives me crazy about, like, the Super Bowl, for example, and other events that we do that work at. They're not even on the radar. They're just out there in the wind. And it's a huge issue. Yes. So I'm doing work with the Pine Ridge Reservation. Pine Ridge reached out, and I did not know a lot about the reservations at all. And that's, I'm not proud to admit that. I should know what's going on there because those people have gone through years and years and years of horrible stuff, right? And they're having a huge problem with kids going missing. And the feds, cops they're not allowed on tribal land, right? So they're not reported. And another thing that we're hearing from the folks at Pine Ridge is, obviously, addiction is a huge issue. Drugs, alcohol, huge issue. And we have parents selling kids. And that's not exclusive to Native Americans by any stretch. That happens across the board. We see a lot of that. The drug issue in this country is no secret to anybody how big of a problem it is. And we have people that are so addicted that they will sell their kids. Yeah. And then they're not getting reported, so they're kind of out there in the wind too. So we're trying to bring some awareness to Pine Ridge. We're actually going out there in March, I believe. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's a cool thing too. Is a lot of times when I speak at schools and stuff, they're like, "Oh, Chris is a subject matter expert." No, I'm not. I'm just someone who's been blessed enough to work with a lot of survivors and learn from them directly, and I learn every day. And that's one of the beautiful things about this ministry, and one of the hard things about the ministry at the same time. So, for sure. And also I wanted to mention, I do have business cards too with my contact info, my email, everything, website, that I have plenty for everybody. If you want one, come hang out, talk to me. I'll give you one. Yes. Mm-hmm. They actually do. They actually do, and I was actually just introduced to them on a phone call last week. So I'm actually looking forward to working with them going forward. Yeah, they have a coalition against trafficking that I think is going to be fantastic to work with, and um, I get phone calls like that all the time. It's like, yes, I would love to work with you, absolutely, because I love sharing what we've learned, and I love learning from them. So it's a really great partnership. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's through the sheriff's department as I go over. Yeah, it's a bunch of different organizations, and the businesses, they would if they knew about it. But there's so much of this. They're so worried about, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my rent, and how am I going to pay my employees and keep things going? And it's kind of one of those, they don't see it happening, so they don't know it's happening. So that's why stuff like this is so important, to educate people. Well, yeah, it is. It's been like that for a long time, but it got magnified during the pandemic. I mean, I'll be honest with you, our ministry, our site, our facility was shut down for 4 months by Pritzker. If it would have gone another month, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. So I know business owners I talk to all the time, they're like, I'm just trying to pay the bills. So, yeah. Yeah. That's why I tell people all the time, spoiler alert, God wins. you know? But yeah, it's, God blesses what he calls us to, right? So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. I'll come back anytime you want. I'm always busy. That's never changing. Cindy, you had a question? Yeah, is that on the printout too? Yeah, because I kind of talked through them. Yeah, so there's different legal issues. So a lot of times sex trafficking survivors have a record because they were labeled as prostitutes, so they were arrested by law enforcement, so they might have a record that needs to be expunged. Deliverance ministry, like I mentioned, pornography addiction recovery, food pantries, because in a transitional time when survivors are moving out of safe houses into their own situation, they need some support as far as food and clothing, stuff like that. Youth ministry is huge. I reach out to youth ministers all the time. And I'm like, let me come in and talk to you guys about social media safety, because these kids are off 100 miles an hour and their parents are like this and don't know what they're doing and they don't want to know. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways people can get involved, for sure. All right. Like I said, I'm going to hang out and answer some questions. And
Would you please join me in thanking Chris?
thank you.
Chris, I want to thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
For your time. I want to thank you for all that you do and for sharing it with us. And I also want to thank you for bearing witness to grace tonight. So would you please, one more time, thank Chris? And then
Thank you, guys.
this came up, but I want to also recognize, do we have any representatives of I believe this is the official name, Lake County Coalition Against Human Trafficking, that are with us tonight? Would you be willing to stand up if you're here? Would you stand up? What is your name? Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you for being with us, Jessica, and for all that you do. We also have, is a safe place here tonight? We have reps. Can you tell us, what is your name? Jennifer. And can you tell us, drug safe
Awesome.
place? Okay.
Yeah, right. Okay. I've heard that name. Okay. Awesome. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it doesn't get talked about enough. Yeah. Growing up in that generation of, oh, you're fine. Just dust yourself off. Go be a man. Like, I tell people all the time, like, that's the healthiest thing I do for myself. It really is. I couldn't do any of it without Jesus and my mental health care team. So,
And then do we have any representatives from Stepping Stones? What was your name? Jennifer, Jessica, and Jean. Did you plant this? Jean, can you tell us what you do and what Stepping Stones does? Thank you.
yeah. And our kids, too. Kids
Yeah.
are doing it. Yeah. Mhm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and what the other thing that kids don't realize when they're sexting, meaning sending nude or semi-nude photos to one another, it's one of the biggest ways that pimps and traffickers will get them, because they'll do this for a year or longer, and by the time that the victim knows it, they've sent them a boatload of pictures, video, whatever. And they're like, if you don't come and meet me in Chicago this weekend for the weekend, I'm gonna post all this stuff on Facebook or TikTok or whatever. I'm gonna tag your school, all your friends, your family in it, and they're gonna see it all. They're like, well, I don't want that, so they go, right? the other thing that kids don't know when they're sending these pictures is they're actually committing a Class X felony. They're sending child pornography, and they don't know it. So, yeah, it's very important work. So I love what you guys do.
So just a reminder, inc180.com
Yep.
if you want to learn more or give. I believe lakecountyil.gov has a link to the coalition. Is that correct? I think a safeplaceforhelp.org, and Stepping Stones. Do we have a steppingstonesnetwork.org? So one more time for Chris and for all in the room who are doing all this work. Yes, and Linda? If you would, please join me in one closing final prayer, and then, as Chris so generously said, he can hang out and answer conversations. And I don't want to speak for Jennifer, Jean, or Jessica, or anyone else whose name starts with J. I'm Jason, so maybe we need a website, but they'll be around. Please, I'm guessing they'd be willing to talk, and maybe you all need to talk. But the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Holy God, as we gather this night, we know that you started by calling Simon and Andrew and James and John, and 2,000 years later, the whole world is still speaking your name. And we have had witness born tonight that when your name is spoken today, the oppressed are released, the dead are brought to life, the brokenhearted are given a new chance, and tombs are emptied. With the souls gathered here, so many more than those 4 you called at the Sea of Galilee, or the 11 who gathered in an upper room, we ask that your Spirit would move. Remind us we are children of God, and lead us all to work for a world where no child or no grown child would ever have to know themselves as anything less. We give thanks for Chris. We give thanks for Inc. 180 and for the many, many lives that have been touched, and pray that you would continue to touch lives there. We give you thanks as well for the Lake County Coalition, Safe Place, Stepping Stones, and for all of the ways and places you are getting loose and rebuilding the world the way that you always intended. We pray all this, giving thanks and praise to you for gathering us here, trusting in your mercy, grace, and steadfast love always. Amen. Thank you, friends. Go in peace and serve the Lord, and please enjoy some refreshment and conversation if time permits. Good evening.